As we enter September of 2024, in this video, I'll be updating my election prediction between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump to see where they stand on the path to 270 electoral votes 2 months out from the election in November. RFK Jr. is officially out of the race and has put his support behind former President Trump. On top of that, the DNC and the RNC have both now been completed, and Kamala Harris, it doesn't seem like she's gotten really any sort of big convention bump. And so we're going to start off by filling in the solid states for both candidates, starting off with the solid blue states for Harris. On the West Coast, we only have Washington and California, and so these solid states are states that Harris or Trump are going to win by at least 15 percentage points. Oregon is just fundamentally slightly more competitive, and the governor's election in the state went down to a single-digit margin in 2022. We also have the state of Hawaii, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maryland, the District of Columbia, and the 1st District of Maine. This will give the vice president 109 electoral votes. While for Trump, he's got a much longer list of solid states. These are all states he's won by 15 points or more in either 2016 or 2020, or even both. And so the solid Trump states are Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakota, all of Nebraska except the 2nd District, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, South Carolina, the 2nd District of Maine, and Alaska. This will put the former president ahead. He's at 126 electoral votes, taking an early lead. Harris trails with just 109. We'll now be taking a look at the likely states. These are states that will be decided by margins between 7 to 15 points. They're definitely going to be more competitive than the solid states, but one candidate is still going to maintain a clear advantage over the other. And so we're going to begin in Oregon, where Kamala Harris is still the favorite, even though it is generally more conservative than its two neighbors, Washington and California. We also have Colorado, a state that Biden won by nearly 14 points 4 years ago. Harris is not going to win by a double-digit margin. The best she'll do is 8 or 9 points, so Colorado will just barely be a likely blue state. We also have Tim Walz' state of Minnesota. Now, if Joe Biden had stayed in the race, Minnesota would probably have been tilt Republican. This is not a state that Trump can't win. In 2016, he came within 2 points of flipping Minnesota, and the Rust Belt has only shifted to the right more ever since. And so looking at polling in Minnesota right now, Tim Walz has clearly given Kamala Harris a boost. He leads by around 7 to 8 points in the polling there. And so outside of his home state, Walz isn't going to have too much of an impact, but as a popular governor, he is going to certainly help Harris out in his home state. So Minnesota will be likely blue. We also have Illinois. It's just barely going to be under 15 points. Illinois generally has also been shifting to the right every single election. Up in the Northeast, we have New York. This is going to be the first time Democrats don't win New York by a solid margin since Michael Dukakis in 1988. We also have neighboring New Jersey and Joe Biden's home state of Delaware. So with the solid and likely states now filled in for Kamala Harris, she has just crossed the 200 electoral vote threshold and is at 201. Before we continue, only 15% of you guys are actually subscribed, so please take the time to subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November, and follow me on Twitter for daily political updates, link in the description below. Moving on to Minnesota, we have a state that hasn't voted Republican since 1972. Democrats are the favorite here as a result of Kamala Harris choosing Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to be her running mate. Walz isn't going to have too much of an impact outside of Minnesota, but in his home state, he is certainly going to give Harris a boost. If Joe Biden had stayed in the race, Minnesota probably would have been tilt Republican. Republicans actually came very close to flipping Minnesota in 2016 when Trump only lost the state to Clinton by 1.5%. Now, Joe Biden did do much better in 2020, and Kamala Harris has averted disaster by choosing Walz as her running mate, but in the future, Minnesota will definitely be a state to watch as the entire Rust Belt continues to shift to the right. In the Northeast, we have New York. The Empire State isn't looking too good for Democrats. This is going to be the first time that they don't win New York by a solid margin since Michael Dukakis in 1988. This is mainly a result of Kathy Hochul being unpopular as governor. We also have Eric Adams, who is unpopular in New York City, and just a few years ago, Andrew Cuomo had to resign as a result of sexual harassment. While down in New Jersey, Democrats have been plagued with scandal here as well. Bob Menendez, the senator that just left office after being forced out, he has been charged multiple times for bribery. And then Delaware, which is going to be the final likely blue state, that's just a likely state because on a fundamental level, it simply isn't as liberal as many of its neighbors like Maryland and Connecticut. And so with the likely states now filled in for Harris, she just manages to cross the 200 electoral vote threshold. We'll now be taking a look at the likely red states, and they're pretty obvious what they're going to be. Iowa and Ohio will come first. Trump has done amazingly well in these two states. He single-handedly turned them from being states in the very middle to being Republican. Just look at the 2012 election. Obama wins them both. Now, 8 years prior, Bush won them in 2004. So these states generally have always been voting with a presidential election winner, especially Ohio, which was a bellwether for 60 years until that streak was broken in 2020 when Biden won the election but lost Ohio. Now, in 2012, Iowa and Ohio went pretty easily to Obama. Just 4 years later, Trump wins them by nearly double-digit margins. We saw a 15-point shift in Iowa and a slightly lesser shift in Ohio, around 10 to 11 points, but still very, very impressive. And so today, Trump is going to win these states by at least 10 points, but crossing 15 points is going to be a struggle. And so right now, I do have them as likely red states. We also have the Lone Star state of Texas, a state that hasn't voted blue since 1976. Democrats aren't going to win Texas anytime soon. It is such a large state, and to be able to move millions of voters to the left, that is going to take a long time. And by that point, basically the entire Midwest will be Republican. And so Texas will go to Trump by around a 10-point margin. In Florida, we're seeing a similar story. Trump is going to win by around 7 to 10 points, even though just 12 years ago, this was the most competitive state in the entire country. Trump won Florida by 1 point in 2016, and then 4 years ago, he won it by 3.4, even though every single poll showed that Biden was the favorite in the Sunshine State. Just 2 years ago, we did see Ron DeSantis get reelected by a 20-point margin as governor. Florida is no longer a battleground state. It is firmly in the Republican column, and Trump is going to win by a likely margin this November. And so with the likely states now filled in for the former president, he retakes the lead with 219 electoral votes. We're now going to move on to the lean states. These are states that will go to either Harris or Trump by margins between 2 to 7 points. And so this is where upsets can happen. Any of these states can be won by any candidate, but we still will give one candidate a slight advantage over the other. And so we're going to begin with the lean blue states. We have New Mexico first for Kamala Harris. She's going to win by just under 7 points. It generally is more conservative than neighboring Colorado, and especially with Hispanic voters moving away from the Democratic Party and New Mexico being the only state in the country with a Hispanic majority electorate, I do have it as a rung below Colorado in terms of how solid it is for Kamala Harris. We also have New Hampshire, which is a state that Trump came so close to winning in 2016, he lost by less than half a percentage point. Now, Democrats did do better in 2020 with Joe Biden winning by 7 points. Kamala Harris will probably still come out on top this November, but it's definitely going to be close. I can see her winning by around a 2 to 4 point margin. We also have neighboring Maine and the 2 electoral votes that come from its at-large vote. 2 electoral votes, really not too consequential. Clinton won Maine by just over 2 points in 2016. Biden won it by nearly 10 points in 2020. Harris is probably going to win by somewhere in the middle of that. We also have the 2nd district of Nebraska, which went to Biden by 7 points. Harris is going to do a little bit worse, but as of right now, she is the very slight favorite. And the final lean blue state on this map is going to be Virginia. And just like Minnesota, if Joe Biden had stayed in the race, Trump would probably be on track to flipping the state right now. Virginia has not voted red since 2004. It moved significantly to the left from 2010 to 2020. But in recent years, it has been moving back to the right with the election of Glenn Youngkin, the Republican, as governor in 2021. And today, I have Harris winning by just over 2 points. It can definitely still go to Trump. We'll have to watch this state closely. But with Harris replacing Biden at the top of the ticket, Democrats have a very slight edge now in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so with the lean blue states now filled in, we're left with the 7 states that we would traditionally consider to be the swing states. These are the states that will decide the election. Now, just because of how well Trump is doing, many of these states aren't even going to be tilt. They're going to fall into the lean red column. And so we're going to begin in North Carolina. This is the most conservative out of these 7 remaining states. Trump is probably going to win by around 3 to 4 points, just like he won it in 2016. In 2020, every single polling average was showing that Biden was going to win. In fact, according to 538 and Real Clear Politics, Biden was ahead throughout the entirety of the election cycle, according to the polling average. But still, he somehow lost. Trump came out on top. It's a state that Democrats have only won once since 1976, and Kamala Harris in 2024 is not going to be the next Democrat to win the state. North Carolina will be lean Republican. We also have neighboring Georgia, a state that Joe Biden actually did win in 2020 by just such a narrow margin. But Trump honestly doesn't need to improve that much in order to take the state back, a state he won by 5 points just 4 years prior. Georgia is still fundamentally quite conservative, like we saw with the re-election of Governor Brian Kemp in 2022, even though Democrats ran Stacey Abrams, who is basically their best possible candidate in the Peach State. So Georgia is also going to be lean Republican, and this will put Trump just 19 electoral votes from retaking the White House. Continuing on the Sun Belt, we have Arizona, which will also be lean for Donald Trump. This is a state that he won by 4 points in 2016, but then he lost it by a very narrow margin in 2020. It was the second most competitive state, only behind Georgia. And just like Georgia, Trump lost out by a few thousand votes, but with Harris now replacing Biden and Biden being a much stronger candidate 4 years ago than Biden is today, Trump doesn't even need to do all that much to take this state back, and that's why Arizona is going to be lean red on our map. And the final lean state we have is Nevada, 6 electoral votes from the Silver State. This is a state that Trump has never even won before, and if you look at the betting markets right now, Trump is the favorite. It's a state that has gone blue in every single election since 2004, but the right is making a resurgence here, as in 2022, Joe Lombardo, a Republican, defeated the incumbent Democratic Governor Steve Sisolak in a tight race, and Trump can certainly replicate Lombardo's success this November. And so Nevada is going to be the final lean state, and this will put Trump at 268 electoral votes, just 2 away from the presidency. And this is why Kamala Harris has to win all of the upper Rust Belt. She has to win Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania to have any chance at becoming the 47th president. And so we're left with just 3 states, and it looks pretty familiar to have these be the remaining 3 states. It was these states that won Trump the election in 2016. More specifically, it was Wisconsin. He did not need to win Michigan and Pennsylvania, but Wisconsin's 10 electoral votes was what got Trump over the edge. And then in 2020, it was once again Wisconsin, the state that put Joe Biden over 270 electoral votes. Now, today, we're seeing a Rust Belt that is probably going to be more split than it was in 2016 and 2020. 2016, Trump won the entire blue wall, which is Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And in 2020, Joe Biden won the entire thing. Now, in 2024, I do have Donald Trump as the favorite in Wisconsin. Many people think that Harris is going to do better because Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is the governor of its neighboring state. But honestly, he's not going to have too much of an impact across state lines, and Wisconsin is generally the most conservative out of the 3 blue wall states. That's been true since the early 2000s, and so it's going to be the first tilt Republican state. Tilt states will be decided by margins of 2 percentage points or less. We also have the Keystone State of Pennsylvania. This is generally seen as the most important swing state, mainly because of its large electoral vote count. If Harris loses Pennsylvania, even if she wins Nevada and Arizona, she will still lose the election because 19 electoral votes from Pennsylvania, it's simply too much to overcome, even by winning 2 other swing states. And Pennsylvania went to Biden by 1% in 2020. Trump is the favorite according to the betting markets on Polymarket. He has a 51% chance at flipping the state and winning it for a second time. And of course, you have to note that the betting markets typically do just go by the polls, and there have been some favorable polls for Harris, but when you compare how well Harris is doing to Biden and Clinton from 4 and 8 years ago, her predecessors are still doing much better than Harris is, and with the polls always underestimating Trump, Harris simply isn't doing well enough. And the final state on the map is Michigan. This was one of the most competitive states in both of the last two elections. It was the closest one in 2016, but today I will give Kamala Harris a very slight edge. It is generally the most liberal out of the blue wall states, and so this will put Trump at 297 electoral votes, Kamala Harris at 241. Trump is still the clear favorite. He doesn't even need to win Pennsylvania or Wisconsin. He only has to win one out of the two, and that will easily get him over the 200 electoral vote threshold. So as of right now, with 2 months to go until the election, Trump is in a more favorable position than he's been at any point in either 2016 or 2020. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November, and join my Discord server, link in the description below.